So tonight we are here for a public meeting for the proposed Mariculture grow out site G-0052 in East Matagorda Bay. And the purpose of this public hearing is to provide information on the proposed cultivated oyster mariculture grow outside in East Matagorda Bay, answer questions about this proposed site, and give instructions on how to submit public comment. Cultivated oyster mariculture, or as you may commonly hear me abbreviate throughout this presentation as CALM, is the growing of oysters in cages or cultivating of oysters. Within Texas, we only allow for floating off-bottom gear. Those grow out cages, bags, some type of container for the oysters, and also at nursery hatchery facilities where oysters are spawned and grown in early life. As I mentioned, it's all off-bottom gear. Applicants nominate their own sites and must conduct a natural resource survey at that site to ensure that there aren't any natural resources of concern that would be in the area. The permit is a 10-year permit, and we only allow Eastern oyster, the Crass Austria virginicus to be used. Some common types of gear you'll see in these grow outs, again, where they take the oysters from a juvenile size to a size that is ready for harvest and market, are floating bags. And so when we say bags, this is not like in mesh bags is a rigid plastic type mesh, not like a laundry bag or anything. They kind of look more like envelopes. And as you see, these floating bags that will have floats on them. A slightly larger form of that is our floating cages. So these cages have similar type of those mesh envelope bags within them in a larger wire structure. They can have 4 to 6 bags. Also, there's ones that are kind of a hybrid between a floating bag and a floating cage. They call floating trays that would just have one bag within that. There's also systems called adjustable long line system, where oysters are contained in what they call baskets, that they're attached to a line, and that line there's post, and posts have different notches, and so they have kind of an in the water feeding position and an out of the water desiccation or drying, and that's used to control biofouling. There is an annual fee associated with these permits, and it's based on the size of the permits. Before they get their final permit and can begin the activity, they must also get authorizations from other agencies such as the Texas General Land Office, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the U.S. Coast Guard. We do require an active use criteria, just showing that someone is actually using this. If they're going to be, holding a place for this, that they're actually using it. Year-round harvest is allowed. However, they must comply with all Texas Department of State Health Services requirements. And quickly to touch on some of those state health services requirements, you will hear me talk about conditionally approved waters. That is a designation given by the Department of Health, and in this case, it only applies to approved for oyster harvest. It does not, if you hear that a water is restricted in this context, it has nothing to do with what any sort of recreational fishing, those activities. Is specifically about harvesting oysters. The Department of Health does this classification and monitors the waters for human health concerns for both oysters and many other species. TPWD does not have an impact on those classifications. If you want more information about how waters are classified and how the Department of Health monitors for oyster safety, please visit their website. Now on to the proposed site, which would be G-0052. It is again a grow out site located in East Matagorda Bay. This is Shellfish Harvest Area TX12, which are approved waters, and is a 2-acre site. Looking at a vicinity map, we're in the kind of upper mid Texas coast, not quite mid, not quite upper, in East Matagorda Bay, and then showing where along East Matagorda Bay, where you can see this red star and the site itself. Okay, I thought I was going to have an access route slide. Maybe that got moved around. The access route is going from that'll be later in the presentation. It got moved around. As part of the application process, they conduct a natural resource survey with sample points both within the site and around the site. And these are sediment samples, checking for sediment type and ensuring that we don't have any active and viable oyster habitat or seagrass habitat. They were collected using a PVC device. So it's where you kind of take a larger PVC tube, 4 to 6 inches. It reduces down to a smaller tube. That smaller tube has a valve or a cap to create suction. So stamp it down into the sediment at the bay bottom there, create that suction, and bring up your sample. Average depth across the site was 4.3 feet. Samples consisted of mud, clay, and some shell fragments. Now, and I have kind of a zoomed in picture. There's one picture of a representative sample, and the zoomed in picture is not of that one, but of a different one to look at those shell fragments. These are smaller shells, so it's not larger oyster shells or things we would consider oyster habitat, but crushed smaller shells, maybe some oysters, maybe mussels, or other bivalves that create shells like that in the area, and no evidence of oyster habitat or seagrass. There's our route to the site. So their proposed route to the site is leaving from the Matagorda Harbor, traveling down the ICWW, through the cut, and then out to the proposed site. The on-site operations will be, it'll be accessed via boat multiple times a week. Gear will be checked for any issues during these site visits, as they're working gear and just checking the site. All work will be done via boat. Any gear that requires cleaning will be taken to land and cleaned there. Oysters will be tumbled and sorted as needed on site if weather permits, or at the designated land point. The gear they propose are these floating cages, kind of an example of a floating cage, and the different size of those mesh bags that go in, and the different sizes are used as the oysters grow. Gear will be anchored with auger or helix anchors using a 3/4 inch nylon anchor lines to secure the cages to the anchors. Buoys will mark the beginning and ending of lines, and all gear will be tagged per regulations. The floating cage system, they will be flipped for desiccation. That desiccation, flipping the oysters up into the air for a short period of time, couple hours, or sometimes in the winter that'll be longer. That helps reduce biofouling. All those little crabs and other organisms fall back down into the water, and then drying out any sort of algae on those. But they will comply with resubmergence requirements and record keeping prior to harvest. Here are examples of site layout. So these are 2 different patterns that they may employ, either with 10 cages per line or 11 cages per line. So just just the one site, not two side by side, just showing two potential schematics that they would use with 3 columns or blocks of line groupings, 9 lines per grouping. A side view, a cross-sectional view, shows the anchoring into the sediment, the main line, and then have what we call lateral lines that are shackled or spliced into that main line where the cages are attached. Cages are attached at 2 points on those lines, and also showing a buoy, example of a buoy at one end, but they will be at both ends of each line. They propose marking the boundary markings with pilings at the 4 corners and then 2 midpoints along each longer section with lights and proper signage as per regulations. Again, this is subject to Coast Guard requirements and approval. Bird deterrence, if needed, will be potentially a bird-away hawk. It's a bird-shaped kite. Bird spikes on the pontoons of floats. Here's an example of some of those spikes, or light reflecting objects on posts or floats that kind of like mirrors that reflect lights and can disturb birds from wanting to land in that area. For their hurricane plan, it's a 5-stage plan going from pre-season storm prep and documentation of what is on the site, and then escalating when the location would be within the cone of uncertainty, when it gets upgraded to a storm watch versus a storm warning, plus plans for about assessing and documenting farm after a storm, refloating, and repairs and recovery. So the next steps for this proposed site be gathering and considering public comment. The deadline for public comment is April 2nd, and those public comment can be submitted to oyster.mariculture@tpwd.texas.gov. Also, if you have any further questions or clarifications, you can send that to that email address. Once that public comment period is over, and if there are no negative comments or comments that need to be addressed, a conditional permit will be issued. Now, the activity cannot begin with that conditional permit. They can just then go to those other agencies showing that, yes, this is something TPWD has reviewed and approved, and they begin the process of gathering all their other agency authorizations. When they have those authorizations, they come back to TPWD, we review, check that they indeed have all the correct authorizations, and a final permit is authorized and issued after that first annual fee is received. Then they may begin mariculture activity. So we'll just pause here for a second. I'm going to put up a screen that has that mariculture web address, email address larger, and then also a shortened link to get to the Oyster Mariculture website if you want to gather more information about mariculture. And just give a pause. If you have any questions, you can use that Q&A button and type in the question box. It doesn't look like we have any questions at this time. I will hand this back to Holly, but again, if you have any questions later, you can email us at the Oyster Mariculture, and public comment period again is open until April the 2nd. Holly?
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. As Lindsay said, you can submit your comments through our Oyster Mariculture email address, which will be sent in a follow-up email from Zoom sometime tomorrow, along with a link, like I said, to our Parks and Wildlife Education YouTube channel, where the recording of this webinar is going to be posted, and that link as well to our Oyster Mariculture page on the Parks and Wildlife website. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We appreciate your time, and we will see everyone next time. Bye.